There are moments in life that never announce themselves as breaking points. They arrive quietly, almost politely, and settle into your days like a thin fog. Nothing dramatic happens. There are no tears spilling over, no raised voices, no sharp edges of visible pain. Instead, there is a silence that lingers inside the chest, a silence that used to be crowded with emotion. You wake up, and the world has lost its tone. Not tragic, not catastrophic, just washed out. Coffee tastes familiar, but uninspiring. Music feels distant, as if the notes can no longer reach you. Even laughter appears like a scene observed from the outside, something happening behind a pane of glass. You reassure yourself that everything is fine because technically it is. You move through routines, you meet expectations, you offer the smile that circumstances call for. Yet underneath the surface, you recognize a vacancy that should not be there. Psychology often frames this experience as emotional numbness, a subtle form of withdrawal that emerges when the mind has absorbed too much for too long. It resembles a system performing an emergency shutdown to prevent deeper damage. When the emotional circuits overload, the mind pulls the plug, not out of punishment, but out of protection. The intention is survival, yet the cost is profound. The same shield that guards you from pain also blocks your access to joy. The barrier that once felt like shelter begins to feel like confinement. I once heard someone express it with striking clarity. They said they did not avoid emotion because they disliked feeling. They avoided it because the very memory of feeling had faded. That is the quiet tragedy of numbness. It is not the absence of happiness alone. It is the absence of vitality itself. If you have ever drifted through life rather than moved with it, that does not mean you are broken. It means your mind has shifted into preservation mode. The human psyche is engineered to regulate emotion, always searching for equilibrium. When experiences become too intense or too persistent, the mind lowers the emotional volume to keep you safe. Its instinct is not destruction, but endurance. Still, the longer you stay in that muted state, the more disconnected you become from the qualities that form the core of being human. Compassion, desire, even the capacity for love begins to dim. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as emotional blunting, a response often tied to chronic stress, unresolved trauma, or depressive patterns. It does not always show on the surface. In fact, the calmest individuals, the ones who appear endlessly controlled, are sometimes the ones who have shut down the deepest. They learned early that emotion makes them exposed, so they built an internal fortress. Over time, that fortress felt comfortable, even protective, and eventually it became easy to mistake that stillness for genuine peace. Yet numbness is not peace. It is a form of pain that has learned to become quiet, a suffering that has chosen silence as its disguise. People who slip into emotional numbness rarely recognize it at the beginning. It arrives gradually, almost quietly, until one day they realize that the spark they used to feel has dimmed. Activities that once lit them up barely register. Sad moments pass without tears, not because they have grown stronger, but because the inner machinery responsible for expression has stiffened. They begin to say they no longer care. Yet beneath those words sits a deep and persistent weariness. When you look closely, numbness often carries the weight of a long story. It is built from years of giving more than they had, from heartbreaks that never received acknowledgement, from emotional work that went unseen. It is the parent who held everyone else together until they could no longer recognize the person in the mirror. It is the man conditioned to hold everything in, believing that composure equals worth. It is the friend who offers a listening ear to everyone except themselves. It is the child who learned early that emotion only led to hurt. Over time, the body forms a harsh equation. If feeling brings danger, then muting those feelings becomes the safest option. The mind adapts, but adaptation is not recovery. It is only endurance, and endurance alone cannot create a life that feels whole. Most people who live in this muted state never actively chose it. They arrived there through repetition, through the same wounds appearing again and again until caring felt too costly. Their emotional silence is not a failure. It is a hard-earned instinct shaped by disappointment, by vulnerability, that was met with pain instead of understanding. They stop opening up not because they lack courage, but because their wisdom has turned heavy with consequence. When every attempt at connection risks another break, withdrawal seems protective. But psychology offers a counterbalance to this bleak pattern. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain is not fixed. It can rewire itself, build new emotional pathways, and relearn sensations that once felt unreachable. The same mind that shut down to survive can eventually rediscover its capacity to feel. Emotional numbness is not a life sentence. It is a pause, a signal that the nervous system has hit its limit and needs time to recover before it can re-engage with the world. That recovery rarely looks dramatic. It resembles stillness, but not the soothing kind. It unfolds slowly, with a gentleness that can feel unsettling. Coming back to emotion after a long freeze resembles thawing from the cold. There is an ache, a tingling, a mixture of relief and discomfort that makes each moment feel new and unfamiliar. You start noticing subtle details again. The pattern of light across a workspace, a melody that awakens a faint stirring inside the chest. These moments are delicate, but they serve as undeniable signs that life is returning. Reaching this point requires facing a difficult truth. Numbness does not mean an absence of emotion. It means the emotions have been pushed down so deeply that they no longer reach consciousness. And everything that is pushed away eventually rises again, waiting for the moment when the mind is ready to feel. When you stop running from what you feel, you begin to remember the version of yourself that existed before exhaustion took over, before caution hardened into habit, before you mistook emotional quietness for strength. At its deepest level, emotional numbness is not a defect. It is a scar, a trace left behind by battles fought without witnesses. When you peel it back with patience rather than judgment, you often uncover a sensitive core, the kind of person who absorbed everything, who felt deeply from the beginning, yet learned to conceal it because the world kept insisting they were too much. Studies in emotional processing show that people who describe themselves as numb frequently exhibit higher empathic capacity once they begin reconnecting. They are not cold. They are sensitive individuals who retreated because they were overwhelmed, not indifferent. That is the paradox many overlook. The people who appear the most detached were often once the most emotionally attuned. They were the ones who caught the smallest shifts in tone, who remembered every detail, who read the room long before others even noticed there was something to read. They were built for connection, but connection became the source of injury. So they closed the door, not as a permanent choice, but as a pause until it felt safe again. Yet time on its own cannot repair this state. Numbness does not loosen with the passing of days, it loosens with the restoration of trust. You do not suddenly wake up restored. You rebuild internal safety one moment at a time, until your mind and your heart slowly start to believe that the world might be safe enough to feel again. This is where misunderstanding becomes most damaging. Many assume emotionally numb people lack warmth, that they have grown indifferent or detached. In reality, they are afraid. Afraid of being overwhelmed by emotions they have kept buried. Afraid of losing control. Afraid that if they open the door too quickly, everything they suppressed will surge forward at once. The answer is not to demand emotion from them, or to insist they simply try harder. The answer is to create an atmosphere where they no longer need to guard themselves so tightly. Numbness softens in the presence of safety, not pressure. It dissolves when met with patience rather than confrontation. If you have been living in that muted space, understand this clearly. Your numbness is not weakness. It is a form of protection that emerged at a time when you had no other tools to rely on. Your story is not destined to remain suspended in emotional quiet. Somewhere within you, the part that once laughed without restraint, cried without hesitation, and loved with a full heart, has never disappeared. It waits patiently for your return, not demanding a dramatic entrance, only a simple acknowledgement. Sometimes that acknowledgement is nothing more than a quiet confession to yourself, a small truth that whispers, "I miss feeling alive." Many people believe that numbness loosens its grip once life becomes stable again. When the crisis ends, when the routine finally settles, when the loss stops aching. But emotional numbness does not dissolve when circumstances improve. It emerges from the aftermath, not the chaos. It is not the storm that silences you. It is the stillness that follows, the moment when the dust settles and you realize that the world has shifted and so have you. In that quiet space, your body continues to brace for danger long after the danger is gone. This is what makes emotional numbness so complex. It is not an emptiness, it is a state of ongoing protection. You are not hollow, you are safeguarding whatever emotional strength remains. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern as emotional avoidance, a process where the mind equates feeling with hurt so strongly that it begins to disconnect before the feeling even arrives. The result is a kind of internal split. Outwardly, you function. You laugh at the expected moments, respond appropriately, follow the rhythm of social life. Internally, you feel unanchored. Your actions become more like reenactments of being alive, rather than genuine experiences. Eventually, you begin to believe that this muted existence is your true self, but it is not. It is the version of you that emerged to endure what felt impossible. Beneath this muted state lies a long narrative of emotional overload, years of overstimulation, quiet heartache, responsibilities that drained you without relief. For many, it grows from the belief that emotion itself is hazardous. Perhaps they were told to stop crying. Perhaps vulnerability only created more conflict. Perhaps every attempt to voice fear or sorrow resulted in punishment or dismissal. So the mind did what it knew best. It adapted. It reduced the volume on feelings that seemed too heavy to hold and too dangerous to express. There is something profoundly human in that instinct because at our core, we all seek to avoid pain. We fill our days with distractions so easily. Work becomes a shield, screens become a quiet refuge, endless scrolling becomes a way to avoid the very thing we fear most. We say we are busy, but often the truth is simpler. We do not want to feel right now. Yet feelings do not vanish just because we push them away. They wait in the background, gathering slowly until numbness becomes the only sensation we can tolerate without coming undone. Even then, this muted state is not a conclusion. It is a transition, a pause suspended between who you were and the person you are in the process of becoming. The psychology behind recovering from emotional numbness is both intricate and quietly hopeful. Research in affective neuroscience suggests that emotions act like internal signals, currents of energy meant to move through us and offer direction. When we suppress them, the energy does not evaporate. It settles into the body. This is why numbness often brings exhaustion, disconnection, foggy thinking, or unexplained aches. Your body is not failing you. It is reminding you that the emotions you tried to silence are still present. Healing begins when you start listening again. Not perfectly, and not all at once, but slowly and with gentleness. The first step is simply noticing. You notice when you begin to shut down. You notice when a song awakens a faint stirring that you immediately try to ignore. You notice when a memory rises and you instinctively look for distractions. These moments are not threats. They are pathways back to feeling. They are invitations to re-enter your emotional life. One of the most powerful things you can do in this state is relearn safety. Emotional numbness does not fade by chasing intense feelings. It heals through consistent experiences of calm. When the body senses that it is safe, emotion returns naturally. This is why practices like mindfulness, therapy, and grounding techniques resonate so deeply. They do not force emotion to surface. They help build trust within the nervous system. Through repetition, you teach yourself that feeling again does not equal danger, that you are capable of surviving what once overwhelmed you. Numbness is the body's way of saying it no longer trusts its capacity to handle emotional impact. Healing is the gradual process of proving that it can. This process is never linear. There will be days when a spark of feeling returns and days when everything turns quiet again. Both states belong to the journey. Emotional numbness rarely disappears in one moment of awakening. It dissolves slowly, in small clues, in brief moments of connection that remind you that your emotional life is still intact and waiting for you to return to it. The first genuine laugh after months of quiet feels like something inside you has finally loosened. The first tear that falls without frightening you is a sign that your emotions are waking up. The first time you say that you are not okay and someone simply listens without fixing or judging, a part of you settles. Not because life suddenly became gentle, but because you stopped insisting that you had everything under control. Emotional numbness can appear in subtle forms that are easy to overlook. Sometimes it hides inside irritation. Sometimes it wears the shape of apathy or constant distraction. For some people, numbness disguises itself as perfectionism, the urge to manage every detail to avoid emotional unpredictability. For others, it looks like retreat, the quiet disappearance of someone who is tired of trying to explain something they do not yet understand. Beneath all these patterns lies a simple longing. I just want to feel safe again. That is where real healing begins. Not with dramatic self-transformation, but with gentleness. Numbness does not lift through intensity. It softens through steadiness, through small, daily gestures that teach your mind and body that you do not have to brace yourself every second. Taking a walk without any noise in your ears. Allowing a song to touch you without skipping it out of habit. Watching a sunset without turning it into content. These moments sound small, even predictable, yet they are the foundation of emotional presence. Numbness cannot hold its shape when awareness quietly expands. As that awareness grows, something inside begins to shift. You start noticing the texture of ordinary life again, the warmth in a beam of sunlight, the sound of laughter drifting from another room, the faint ache of nostalgia that reminds you there is still movement in your inner world. These sensations are fragile, but they are real, and there is a kind of truth in them that perfection can never replace. Psychology can describe the mechanics of emotional reawakening, but there is a moment that no theory can measure. The moment when you stop watching your own life from a distance and begin participating in it again. You can feel it, even if you cannot define it. It is when the world stops being something you endure and becomes something you inhabit. Even then, the goal is not endless happiness. The goal is honesty. Emotional numbness often grows from the pressure to always seem strong, grateful, calm. Healing begins when you let yourself experience the entire range of emotion, from joy to sorrow to uncertainty, without labeling any of it as failure. That is the essence of emotional maturity, the ability to sit with whatever arises without rushing to escape or correct it. If you have been living in a muted state for a long time, maybe this is the moment to redefine what healing truly means. It is not a return to an earlier version of yourself. It is a gradual expansion into someone capable of holding more emotional depth, more truth, more of your own humanity, someone who is no longer frightened by the intensity of their inner world. You do not need to hunt for your feelings as if they were lost. They have been with you the entire time, tucked beneath the noise, beneath the armor you built, beneath the years spent pretending that nothing could reach you. This time, instead of forcing yourself to feel better, you can allow yourself to be uncertain, imperfect, and a little disoriented. That honesty is where healing begins. Numbness flourishes under suppression but loosens its grip when met with authenticity. This is the quiet irony of recovery. The moment you stop trying to force emotional clarity, the emotions begin to return on their own. Not as overwhelming surges that threaten to pull you under, but as steady currents that guide you back to yourself. There is a term in psychology that captures this beautifully: re-engagement. It describes the slow, deliberate return to life after withdrawing from your emotional world. It shows up in the small things. The moment when eye contact becomes natural again, when a laugh feels less practiced, when your reflection starts to look familiar, that is the direction your story may be moving toward. Not perfection, but re-engagement with a life that remains chaotic, imperfect, and extraordinary. You may not notice the shift immediately. Healing rarely announces itself. But one day you might catch yourself smiling without a reason, and the quiet warmth of it will move through you with a sense of certainty. In that moment, you will understand something profound. The numbness did not vanish. You grew beyond it. Along the way, you stopped shielding yourself from your own emotions. You stopped equating depth with weakness and began to see feeling as evidence that you are still fully alive. That quiet rediscovery of emotional presence is one of the most powerful transformations a person can experience. So do not rush this process. Do not force it into shape. Continue living, even if your steps feel slow or unsure, until one day you realize the silence inside you has softened into something warmer, something gentler, something undeniably alive.